Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm in Arizona at the Colorado River, and today we're going to be looking for the remains of a town called La Paz. Now, La Paz means the peace, but this place was anything but peaceful. And in 1863, it was the spot where the westernmost blood of the American Civil War was spilled. Now, despite this town once being the county seat for Yuma County, and reportedly being only one vote away from being the territorial capital of Arizona, supposedly little remains of it. So let's head a few miles north of here and see what we could find at La Paz. Here's a quick look at the Colorado River where Interstate 10 crosses it, just to give an idea of the water levels on the river now, as the river plays an important part in this story. Where we are heading today is about 6 miles north of the interstate, onto the Colorado River Indian Tribes Reservation via Mojave Road. So we've reached where La Paz once stood. It might not look like it, but this is the newer part of the town. We should check out an older section later. There isn't a lot standing, but I'll get into why in just a minute. I do see some structures up on the hill in front of us, so let's go check those out first. Like most towns in this part of the world in the mid-1800s, this was a mining town. Paulino Weaver discovered gold near here in 1862, and since the gold was discovered on the Feast of Our Lady of Peace, they named the site La Paz. And there's a small section of concrete over here. This is probably from the 1950s when they tried to build a mill here. There's some more concrete over here, and this bit actually looks a little bit older. This might be from the early 1900s. There was another operation they tried to start up here, but I'll get into that in just a bit. And it looks like there's a few more concrete blocks right over here as well. So getting back to La Paz, this was a great place for a town, as it was right on the river, giving easy riverboat access to get supplies in and to ship the gold out. After the gold was found, anywhere from 1,500 to 5,000 people moved here, depending on what source you read. And when the Arizona Territory was separated from the New Mexico Territory in 1863, La Paz was made the county seat for Yuma County and was in the running to be the territorial capital, losing out to Prescott. Desert Magazine said it lost out by only one vote. And there's a lot of wood laying around here. This would also be from the operations here in the 1900s and not from the 1800s town site. La Paz would be a major town for its time, with regular stage service to San Bernardino and a riverboat service to other towns up and down the Colorado River. The town, of course, had its bars and brothels, but you could also find things here like a French bakery. There was even a shop that sold Cuban cigars, just to give an idea of the type of goods the town had access to. Business was good, and the town was the center of politics for the area. La Paz even had the second newspaper established in the Arizona Territory. The future probably looked pretty bright. Most mining towns die when the gold dries up, but here, the river did first. Before it was controlled by dams, the Colorado River would occasionally change course, and that happened in 1866, with the river moving about 2 miles away from town, leaving the river port of La Paz high and dry. So in 1869, it was voted to move the county seat from La Paz to Arizona City, which was later renamed Yuma, and the change officially took place in 1870. The town held on for a bit, but was largely deserted by the mid-1870s. Even though the town died, gold mining in the area continued, and I believe the structure we're approaching right now was built in 1909. Now, the reason we can't see a lot of the old town site is because the Colorado River may have left La Paz, but it would come back with a vengeance. Most of the buildings in La Paz were made of adobe or wood, so when the Colorado River flooded in 1912 and washed over the town site, most of the town just melted away. So I believe this structure was part of a planned operation to pump river water here and dredge it looking for gold. But the guy who owned it was killed in an auto accident, and it never got started. Let's head up and get a view from above. Supposedly they took about $8 million in gold from the area during the time the town was going. That's about $154 million in today's money. The ground is really loose here, I just slipped. Like most mining towns, La Paz was a pretty rough place. But it was said to be pretty peaceful at first. But once people from California started showing up, it went downhill. I'm sure there are some people in Arizona watching thinking, things never change. And take a look at this view. It's hard to believe there was a town here. Or a river. The Colorado River is about 2 miles away, but you can hardly even tell it's there. If we were standing here 160 years ago, we could be seeing riverboats just a little bit past where the road is. And here's what's left of this dredging operation. Now we're coming to the ruins of a stamp mill that was built in the 1950s, but only lasted a few months. Like with most of these Old West mining towns, you are more likely to find broken dreams than gold, especially if you didn't get in early. I've moved to the top of the stamp mill. There's actually something living in it, maybe a possum, but I didn't get a great look. But because it's their home and I'm just a visitor, I'm going to give it some space. But we could take a look from over the top here. Whatever it was, it's just under this roof. And of course I never have the camera going when an animal shows up. But here's a look at the stamp mill, or what's left of it. More concrete hidden by the bushes. Here's some more infrastructure from the 1900s operations out here. La Paz was pretty dangerous in its time, but leaving town, especially towards the east, was pretty dangerous too, as people traveling through the area would often be attacked by natives. Ironically, the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs was even killed at one point. Speaking of the local natives, there was a story that was published in Desert Magazine that said because of all the issues between the townspeople and the natives, a spokesman from the town met with a chieftain of the Mojave people, and he tried to reason with him, saying, "Wouldn't you guys like to settle down and come live in town and live an easy life?" And the chieftain replied, "Well, you white men like to hunt deer and quail, right?" And the spokesman was like, "Well, yeah." And the chieftain said, "Well, we like to hunt white men." Now, as funny as that story is, and I'm not sure how true it is, it's no secret that the American treatment of the natives was nothing short of horrific. And that brings us to the part of La Paz that we're going to visit next, which is right on the other side of the road. Here is a memorial for the Hualapai killed in the Paz Trail of Tears. If you're familiar with the Grand Canyon area, you might know that it's the homeland of the Hualapai. So what were they doing here? In 1874, the army rounded up hundreds of Hualapai and forcibly moved them here. They did this by marching them here over 2 weeks, in which time a number of children and elderly died. The ones that survived were placed in a concentration camp, where assault on the women by soldiers was frequent, as was death by starvation and disease. After about a year, the remaining Hualapai escaped and returned to their homeland, only to find a lot of their lands now occupied by ranchers. The accounts of what happened are pretty terrible, but I'll put a link in the description if you want to read more about it. The current Hualapai Reservation in and around the Grand Canyon was created in 1883. We've also come to an area where we could see a bit of the original town. These mounds are what's left of the melted adobe. That also brings us to what brought me out here today, the La Paz incident, which happened on May 20th, 1863. So in 1862, the Confederates occupied Tucson, and there were several small Civil War battles in what is now Arizona. The Confederates had abandoned Arizona by 1863, but a group of California secessionists that were bound for Texas were captured in Yuma early in the year. One of those arrested was William "Frog" Edwards. After Edwards was released from custody at Fort Yuma, he headed to La Paz, and here, an opportunity presented itself to make his mark in the war he had been trying to join. And there's a little bit of a stone wall left here. Unfortunately, what any of these buildings were is lost to time. On the evening of May 20th, 1863, a small party of soldiers heading to Fort Mojave by steamship stopped at La Paz. As the soldiers went ashore to purchase supplies, lurking in the shadows was Edwards. As the soldiers approached the store, Edwards ambushed them, opening fire with his revolver. 3 soldiers were shot. One was killed instantly, a second was mortally wounded and died the following day, and the third was severely wounded but recovered. A bystander was also struck, but I don't know their fate. The remaining soldiers searched the town, but they couldn't find Edwards. The next day, the Union soldiers returned to Fort Yuma with their dead and wounded. A troop of 40 men was deployed to hunt Edwards down. Several days later, they found his body in the desert, where he apparently died of exposure and dehydration. They didn't even bother recovering the body, as a coward didn't deserve a proper burial. So presumably, it's still out in the desert somewhere. I guess in the end, Edwards, who wanted to join the war so badly, got what he wanted, becoming a footnote as part of the westernmost armed confrontation of the American Civil War. This is probably the most substantial remains of the town still standing. It's amazing to think, all that's left of what was once one of the most important towns in Arizona are a few stone walls and piles of mud. So that's our look at the town of La Paz and the La Paz incident. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.